back in the caveman and woman days when we looked around and you didn't know, who is this person coming next to me? Are they from a friendly tribe, warring tribe? And the same thing with, what's that sound from nature? Is that going to hurt me? Is that going to be safe for me? So we're hardwired to be more negative in our environment for our survival. So I think it's important to recognize that and to remember, that we do, again, from that empowered nature, we can choose to create rituals and to really rewire the brain.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Subbo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I am Ashton Subbo, your host. Today's episode is about the 6 qualities of consciousness and how understanding these qualities can help us live more engaged and skillful lives. Our guest today is my friend, a teacher of yoga teachers. He's a wellness counselor and author, Danny Arguetty. He taught at the Kripalu Center in Massachusetts for a number of years. And he's written 2 books on yoga, Nourishing the Teacher, which is a great resource for any yoga teacher out there. And he recently published a book called The 6 Qualities of Consciousness, Practical Insights from the Tantric Traditions of Yoga, which is a wonderfully down-to-earth, accessible book on tantric philosophy and dives deeper into the topic we're going to explore on the show today. Now, unfortunately, we experienced some technical difficulties during our recording, and the first part of our chat had unusable audio. So we're going to start our chat today by diving right into the conversation. So here we go, Danny Arguetty and myself discussing the 6 qualities of consciousness. I hope you enjoy. So in your book, the 6 Qualities of Consciousness, you explore 6 different concepts that help people skillfully engage the world. And as I understand, they're intelligence, freedom, evolving perfection, community, abundance, and life's eternal motion. Now, I want our listeners to hear more about these qualities, but a lot of yoga philosophy can sometimes go over people's heads or people have very little interest in it anyways. Can you kind of explain these ideas or summarize these ideas in a way that kind of makes them digestible to everyone? Like, how can a person who perhaps has never done yoga or even cares to do yoga benefit from understanding these 6 qualities of consciousness? Like, why can they, or how can they help everyone live more skillfully at life?
Yeah, so basically, one of the reasons I fell in love with these teachings is that I feel like they really represent and imprint onto and mirror really just nature's teachings. And, I in my life, I grew up in concrete environments for the majority of my existence. And then I lived in Vermont at one point. And that was a real big shift in my experience because it was the first time that I was really immersed in the natural world. And I was resistant to it at first. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? And then within a few months, I was blown away. Just so many things shifted. And just being immersed in that, observing the functions of nature, I got really fascinated. I wanted to learn more about that. And when I came across these teachings, I loved the same idea that I was like, wow, I can find every single one of these in the natural world. And in a sense, in this idea of skillful engagement, we can think about it like this, like life created this blueprint, that it created a program, to use the metaphor that of technology these days. It created a program that's been running for billions of years. And what's very clear is that we can misalign or we can align with that program. And when we're able to line up with the intelligence of all of life and the way that it functions, it just makes things easier. We get the results that we're wanting with less effort. We get more life-enhancing results that are going to be supportive for ourselves and to the larger community as well. So that's why I just want to start out with that as because philosophy can get grand and lofty, I always, when I talk about these teachings, I always come back to this piece of look for them not only in nature, but they're everywhere. They're in your life, in the day-to-day, they're out in the world, in the macro, the micro. And for me, that creates excitement, because it's not just coming from some random text. It's actually something that I can live into and see. So, so basically the first teaching of intelligence, similar to what I was saying, is just this idea that there is this blueprint of intelligence. Life is absolutely brilliant, both, and I focus in my writing on the physical body because I love it. I geek out on this stuff. I get into these moments, constant moments of awe when you start to think about the way the immune system works or the way that our digestion works. It really is mind-blowing. It's like science fiction, a lot of it. It's like, how is this happening? And the same thing with nature. When we start looking at the intelligence that's present in nature, from, fish in the ocean that can change from one gender to another, to just the vast scope of vision that an eagle has. All these things that are just, for me, really exciting, and it's this wow of there's a brilliance that has created this world, and what shifts when we awaken to that.
And so as we become more aware of the intelligence of the world, and this is actually something that comes in a lot of the shamanic teaching and trainings that I've done, where, we're learning to observe the natural world so much more. And I think there's a natural sense of wonder that comes out of that, a deeper understanding of ourselves in that gray picture. As well, once we understand a lot of the things that we might see and take for granted in our normal everyday life, when you actually understand the symbolism behind a lot of these things, I keep seeing crows everywhere. What do crows represent? And then you see, oh my gosh, they represent this idea or this particular type of energy that completely connects with my life right now. It's amazing how far down the rabbit hole of intelligence that we can kind of really play with in our own lives. But once that happens, and I think a lot of people get to that moment of those awe moments of really connecting into how incredible life is like that. What comes next? Or do these 6 qualities work in a progressive order, or are they all kind of just there that we're kind of dipping into at times? Because freedom is kind of the next on the docket, but does that necessarily mean that it's coming next, or does it just happen to be another topic of conversation?
Yeah, so I think this is something often that happens in the tantric teachings, where it's both, things are both structured in a linear curriculum sort of way, but then they're also woven together. Commingled is really the word of, and woven. So, they also bleed into each other and form each other, support each other. So I think it really is just what works for people in the way of, is it more of a linear structure of exploration, or for some people, they look at these teachings and it's like, oh, one really speaks out to me most, or there's one that I feel like I want to explore most in my life that would potentially serve me in this moment, and that's going to impact all the other ones. Yeah, freedom is the next one, and that really speaks to this idea of empowerment, and just this concept that we all have an ability to do so much, and but sometimes we get in our own way, whether it's the certain beliefs that don't support us, or that have been created through past life experience trauma. But what happens when we're able to recognize that, move through that, compost that, and step into a place of more empowerment in what we're doing? And this is where it can get murky in that place as well. So there's certain things to ground this process of tapping into our inherent free and empowered nature. And this is one thing I really love in the Tantra, is that freedom is spawned from a place of desire. So there's this little exercise that someone can explore, of letting themselves run free with desires, of just what is it that you're wanting to dive into in your life. And while a lot of the older traditions of yoga characterize desire as a negative thing, from this point of view, we look at it as something. I mean, it makes babies. It gives people creative. The Beatles wouldn't have made their music without desire. So we look at it as really as a positive force. But within that, we need a structure, right? So once we recognize our desires, we need to have an understanding of a hierarchy of value of, okay, I have all these desires. Which ones do I want to focus on right now? How am I going to dedicate my action? And that's the last piece. So we recognize our desires, we create a hierarchy of value, and then it's this piece of, okay, where am I going to channel my energy now to work with?
So for someone that's hearing that, and I'll kind of just play the devil's advocate in that sense of like, okay, well, yes, I'm okay, awesome. You're giving me full permission to explore my desires. My desire is to covet that man's wife over there and to have all of that money that person has and that house up on the hill over there. I want that. Is this tradition saying, cool, go for it? Like, yeah, whatever you want. Absolutely. It's all divine. Because you mentioned a hierarchy of values in our own personal stream of desire, but where does morality fit into it, or ethics fit into it? Like, how does that fit into one of the 6 qualities of consciousness? Like, how is that coming into play?
Yeah, so this is a good point, because in the tantric, in this Rajanika Tantra point of view, and this sometimes people have a little bit of a hard time with, but the idea here is that we live in a powerful universe, not a moral universe. So it is this idea of, there's this matrix of power in the yoga world. It's called often the Shakti, the creative, vital life force. And the reality is that everyone has access, because we're free beings. Everyone has access to that power, so you can get skillful at what you do with that. But of course, as you mentioned, so there aren't morals, but there's consequences, right? So if you choose to do certain things and take certain actions in your life, you have to tolerate the consequences of those actions, of being yourself in that regard. So the Tantra is very clear on, it's not a free-for-all, because there are rules and structures. But this is where it can go both ways, because sometimes there's a benefit of breaking the status quo, right, and breaking a rule. You take a risk in that, and then that's the personal contemplation. That's where we get to choose. Okay, how much risk am I willing to take, and can we live into this place of there will be consequences for our actions one way or the other. But I think that for me, that makes it exciting, and it invokes also this ability to source. So of course we take cues from society and whatever other guidance for morality, but at the end of the day, we get to check in with ourselves and make those decisions from a deeper place, as opposed to just from an outer source that's saying don't do it because it's not okay.
Absolutely. Well, and it makes me kind of think of the concept of karma, which often in the West, people kind of have taken the Judeo-Christian model of like punishment from some dude with a beard up in the clouds, and they just kind of brought this idea, well, it's no longer a dude in the clouds, it's this ethereal, mystical force called karma that's going to, reward those that do good and punish those that do bad. But rather, the concept itself is really just pointing to like whatever you do in life, like, is going to have a consequence to it, and whatever action you take, like, you made the choices to get there. So you walk across the street and you get hit by a bus. It's not because you hurt a baby chicken in your past life, but rather because each and every individual step you took right before that bus, those are choices you made. So those are the consequences that you live with. It's not so much a moral concept, but rather, like you said, like, certain things are going to have consequences. Some of those will be more on the energetic side. Some of those will be very practical human side, where it's like, okay, this culture has this law not to do that thing. You're going to have a consequence with that. So, okay, so we're recognizing this intelligence of the universe. We recognize that we have inherent freedom to really do whatever we choose. What comes either next or in addition to that?
Yeah, so the third quality is this idea of evolving perfection, and it's this piece of okay, you know that there's this intelligence, you know that you have this ability to step into a skilled empowerment in your life. And this is really the place of, can we hug into our worthiness, our fullness, this idea that we're already perfect and whole to begin with. So this is a paradoxical teaching, but then it's saying, but can you also, because we're in this place of there isn't a fixed point of enlightenment, the journey never ends. So can you also welcome this ability to stretch out and to grow into more, to learn more, to see more, to be awakened more? But the key is it's coming from a place of the glass half full as opposed to the glass half empty. And again, to contrast, some of the religious pieces, often there's these theories of humans were born into sin, or, we start with like a negative bank account, and how do we get past that? And this is pushing up against that a little bit and saying like, no, again, life is made out of this fabric of intelligence. I mean, if you look at the human instrument, it's brilliant. So how can we say that someone that's born is born less than? Mm-hmm. So we already start full and complete. But then how do we grow into more?
When we very much come from a culture of like the idea that something is lacking from us. I think I listen to a lot of Brene Brown and read her books and stuff, and one of the topics she talks a lot about is this idea that like for most people, they wake up in the morning and their first thought is like, I didn't get enough sleep. And then the whole rest of their day is like, not enough, not enough. They get to the end of their day and it's like, well, let me think about all the stuff I didn't get done today. And it tends to be a constant in the background of our modern lives. So it's nice to recognize the totality or the completeness of everything or the perfection of everything. It's not a invitation for apathy, like, okay, we're all perfect, so we don't have to do anything, but rather like, okay, we're full already, now let's go out and play. And to me, that the whole concept of play, which also exists as Leela in the traditions, but sounds like a big part of this, where it's like you ask a child why they play, and they look at you like you're kind of crazy. They're like, well, what do you mean? You play to play, like it's play. But when you talk to most adults, like there's always there's a reason why they're doing it. They need to get something else. I need to do this work so I can get this money. I need to go to yoga so I can help improve myself. And it's always this place of lacking that, well, my actions are going to be motivated by needing to fulfill something versus like, hey, I'm full and this is something I choose to do, so I'm going to go play over in this direction for a while. And I think that in and of itself, as you had mentioned, is very empowering. Because like, okay, I don't have to do this from a place of wanting. I can do it because it's or lacking. That is, I can do it from a place of like, all right, I'm full, and now I just want to explore and have fun with it.
Yeah, and just to acknowledge also what you said, there is this element, and this is one of the things I enjoyed about writing this book, is really looking into the science of things, because I love the specifics in that regard. So, just to acknowledge where we are at as human beings, there's something called a negative bias that we all have, and it's this piece, of course, it comes from our evolution of human beings are designed to be a little bit more negative to start out with, for survival reasons, right? Because it's like back in the caveman and woman days when we looked around and, you didn't know things. You didn't know, who is this person coming next to me? Are they from a friendly tribe, a warring tribe? And the same thing with, what's that sound from nature? Is that going to hurt me? Is that going to be safe for me? So we're hardwired to be more negative in our environment for our survival. So I think it's important to recognize that, and to remember, that we do, again, from that empowered nature, we can choose to create rituals and to really rewire the brain. Not that we want to get rid of that completely, right? Because it's a survival mechanism, but we can work more towards the places where we're already full and complete. But it does take effort. So.
Well, I think that segues nicely into the next quality, being community, because it seems like that we're like, okay, now we're recognizing the intelligence of everything, recognize that we can come from a place of freedom to choose the type of world we want to create, come from a place of fullness instead of lacking. But and then that brings in like, well, now we need the community to agree upon it so that we can move forward together instead of like the lone wolf off in the corner. I mean, that was very much my early path in yoga of like, I'm going up in the mountains. I got a cave. I'm like, screw the rest of the world. I'm out of here because I don't agree with the rest of the world. And I was very much on the vertical path. But that horizontal path, like, look, we're all in this together. Let's figure out a way to make it work together and make it work for everybody as it needs to work. So where from the sort of larger sense, where does community or how does community fit in here for you?
Yeah, so this concept of community, or kula, also another word that I really love for it, is collective. And there's something that really resonates for me in that word of just, exactly what you said. We're dependent on one another, and we can support each other to both accomplish more and also see more, right? Because everyone's living in their own bubble, their own perspective. And I'm sure many have had experiences where like two brains are better than one. You get more opportunity to evolve something when there's a dual or even group effort that's connected to it. So community is just it can break down into, so we can go so many different ways with it. But I think really this piece of how do we use everyone's individual unique skills to uplift everyone else. So instead of me having to become an expert in everything, I can defer and I can celebrate and I can say like, oh, I'm going to my massage therapist who's brilliant at that. I don't need to study that. I'm going to celebrate his skill set for that. I'm going to go to my doctor and just revel in her study and background. So just, it's like, how do we get a support network for ourselves in that way, and instead of that individual mentality that we have to get it done all on our own.
Yeah, a bit of a contrast from like the Renaissance man idea that like, ooh, well, let's do everything, or the jack of all trades, the major multitasker. It's like, well, no, like recognize that we all have a natural flowering, which might change throughout life, but still that natural process into something that like, hey, I want the person that absolutely loves to build things build my house. I don't want the person that's like, oh crap, I got to get this done, but I have the skill set to do it maybe to just get something done. Like you want people that are really meant for that task that they're doing, which I think also then leads in nicely to the next quality, because when everybody is doing that and coming together and supporting one another, then that seems like it would naturally progress to abundance for everybody. Would you say that's kind of how that leads in there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, abundance is just something that we see in nature. It's part of the blueprint of life, right? If you look at like how much fruit one tree gives off, it's mind blowing that there can be such flourishing and wealth that's provided by the natural world. And for sure, when we work together and support each other to uplift in that way, that's going to increase the vitality for everyone. And like you said, it again shifts that focus of just only the individual journey of taking care of yourself to how can that be a greater ripple for others as well. And in this idea of abundance, what I really want to make the distinction, and there's nothing wrong with this at all, but in the older contemplative traditions of yoga, we often hear this word of contentment, which is beautiful, right? It's like, how can we get into this place of being content with our life and appreciate and come from a place of gratitude? But really, the contrast here I want to draw upon is in this idea of abundance. It's how can we thrive and flourish, and right, just the energetics of those two words, contentment versus this place of where are you flourishing? Where do you want to thrive in your life, to grow in this abundant way. And for me, that just it creates more of a jazzed energy of like, yeah, there are definitely places that I know I'm not flourishing, and places that I know that I want to thrive and grow more into.
To have that contrast and difference, we kind of need to come from that place of fullness, right? Like that we're already complete. So there is a sense of contentment there, but it's not the contentment that sort of leads to apathy of like, well, my life is fine, my life is great. Doesn't matter that I live in a dirt hovel and can't really fulfill my dreams because I'm content with what's going on, which again is very much the attitude of a lot of the spiritual traditions. But it's nice to kind of see the possibility of and this is so much of what we talk about on the podcast in general, is like, how do we live a so-called spiritual life, but while fully engaged in the world? And there sometimes can be this really big disconnect from some of the traditions that have been brought over to the West, where it's like, oh, well, I just need to be okay with everything, and I need to get rid of all my stuff because my stuff is getting in the way. And but then it creates the opposite too, where it's like, well, because we only have people that are only interested in stuff. They're only interested in, that they might hide it under, especially in sort of new age communities, use words like abundance to hide just all out greed. Like, oh, I want to be more abundant, so I'm just going to do whatever it takes. Or they're coming from that place of lacking. So I like how they kind of tie in together that we're not looking for abundance because we need something. It's sort of a natural progression of living your purpose. That's actually a big part of the Ganesha mini-series that we just recorded for the Savannah podcast, that it's all about like, okay, abundance may or may not come, or it will come in your life, but it may come monetarily or otherwise. But if you make that abundance the goal, then you're often detracted. You get caught up in illusion. But when you are living that profound experience of life, then it sort of naturally flows. Because as you say, like, people are able to thrive, and so that will come.
Yeah, and that's how, that's really how they really do feed into each other, because when we look at these other areas, that's going to yield more of that. And I love, what you said of definitely that emphasis of abundance is so multifaceted and multidimensional, right? It's definitely not just the physical elements or the financial elements, but there's so much more that it can add richness to our lives.
And so the final quality, the life's eternal motion, how does that play into the things we've discussed so far?
Yeah, so the last one is again a little bit of a contrast for the older teachings of yoga that were often focused on stillness and quieting. We hear this a lot in classes, like quiet your mind, still your body, and the idea here is that the reality is that everything is always moving. I mean, if you think about it, we're sitting in what seems like stillness, but we're really, the planet is spinning at about 1,000 miles per hour. Then within that, we're in the solar system. Within that, we're in the galaxy. Within that, it's like an expanding universe. I mean, thank God we don't know that that's happening, because imagine going through your day with that kind of commotion. Not fun. But it is this idea that life is in constant movement, but it's this, again, it has this element of conscious intelligence. It's a pulse. It's a rhythmic and part of this continual motion. So I just want to contrast, because there can be erratic motion and there can be more just fluid, connected motion. And this is the idea that we can tap into this rhythm, this pulse of life that's always in the background, and also utilize it to recognize that in this constant movement, there's this inherent piece, and this last teaching is the one. It's like sometimes it's hard to grasp this one, but in this movement, there's this idea that things are concealed and things are revealed. So it's natural for us to forget things, to forget our rituals, to forget teachings that we've learned. But then there's this opportunity when things get occluded for things to arise again, to have a conversation with a friend, to go to a class and remember something. So we get this gift of what's called revelation. So So yeah, so this is kind of like a dual teaching of both honoring that motion is not inherently bad, especially when it's engaged with skillfully, and then also this idea that it's okay to not know it all. You're not going to be privy to all the information of life, and to celebrate that as a gift, because that it guarantees, in a sense, all the others. It guarantees that you can learn more intelligence, that you can find more ways to become empowered, that you can tap into community or fullness. So all the other principles or qualities really work with this as the undercurrent.
There's an old Osho story that very much ties in this idea kind of flow and getting in the flow of the universe and a perpetual motion, that you've got these two twigs that are floating down a river. Now the river goes to the same place for everybody. Like it's all going out to the ocean. It's all going out to the sea. So we all end up in the same place. But you've got this one twig that is, to use sort of similar terminology, misaligned. Like this twig is trying to stop the flow of the river. They are completely intent. They're moving erratically. They're trying to turn against that flow and block the river. But it's a twig, so ultimately it's not going to stop that flow. Like I can sit here and meditate all I want. I'm not going to stop the earth from spinning. But because they're living that life, they're living in sorrow. They're living in misery. They're constantly unhappy with what's going on. And you've got this other twig that says, you know what, I'm going to help the river, and I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to align with it. Now, the rivers are still going the same place. Like it's still going to the ocean. Whether or not I sit here and meditate and say I'm going to stop the flow of the planet, or I'm going to sit here and help the flow of the planet, I mean, the flow of the planet is still happening. But one of the primary differences is that like the twig that's moving with things, one, they're not getting bashed up against the rocks as much, but they live more joyously. They're connected to that experience around them versus constantly struggling and disconnecting from it. They're allowed to be immersed in it so much more, because at the end of the day, I mean, for all of us, no matter what our profession is or what we do, we're all going to end up in that same place eventually with our physical bodies. Like it's all going to go back to the earth at some point anyways. So it's nice to recognize like, well, hey, I have a choice. I can live miserably or I can live joyously. And it's nice to know that there are actual skill sets involved. I mean, we in the United States, we don't go to school and get a handbook on living. We get a handbook on like, all right, here's how you be a good consumer, and here's how you get a job. It's not like, oh, how do I live happily in the world? Which it's nice that, people like yourself, authors like yourself, they'll come out and kind of create these types of things that can kind of help us in understanding life in a more practical and accessible way. In particular, through the tantric traditions, which there are some monastic traditions out there in tantra, but so many of them are householder traditions because they're interested in like, how do we live in the world with this stuff? I mean, that's really what's more. I mean, maybe not appropriate to say more important, but definitely more of the emphasis of to say like, hey, how do we, like all these realizations up on the mountaintop, that's great, but how do we live them in the everyday world? What are some ways that people, or a way, like if you could say, well, here's one thing that you could do to really live these six qualities, or this understanding of these six qualities, or if there's just one that you could really pick, like how would you're going up an elevator right now and someone says, oh, you're that guy that talks about the six qualities of consciousness, like, and you got to give them the juice in like that 1 to 2 minute elevator ride. Like how can you help them, or what's the thing that they can do?
That's a good question. I feel like I get torn because I love so many of them. But I think that honestly, the backbone of all of these is awareness and mindfulness, because without that, the exploration of them is not going to be possible. But like so many teachings in yoga, I feel like it's this personal journey and personal inquiry, and it's this piece of like just choosing one to explore that again, like I said before, either resonates or brings up resistance, because those are two good pieces that can often be a guide, a compass to dive into one or the other, and just start to see where it shows up in your life. Where does it apply? Where is it speaking to you most? So I'm not answering your question. I'm going around it, but I can't pick one.
How about this perhaps? Can you give me an example of a moment in your life that was particularly difficult? And how these teachings helped you move through or with that difficult moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think the Kula one comes to mind the most, the community piece, because I know, for me, historically speaking, I've done a lot of things on my own. I've accomplished a lot, and I often get into this mindset of like I have to do it on my own. So asking for help is often something that's a challenge, and I recently moved to Seattle from San Diego about 5 months ago or so, and the first couple of months, in a move transition, I didn't know a ton of people here, and it was definitely challenging. And I remember one day in particular, I was just feeling very low mood. I called one of my friends on the East Coast, and I just burst into tears. And she didn't have to say anything. She just sat there and held the space for me. And I hadn't cried like this for quite a while. It was like 20 minutes of nonstop tears. And I definitely had, before I dialed her number, I was like, I had a lot of resistance. I was like, this is a form of asking for help, for someone to just witness me in my emotional experience. But I did it. I managed to get over the story of like, oh, you just need to sit here and cry on your own. And I felt so, like, again, she didn't have to say anything, but I felt so loved and held and supported when I was complete, and when the conversation ended. So I think it's really, in these little moments they really do make a big difference. And when we're faced with like, okay, here's an opportunity to do something different, and to make that choice.
Awesome. I mean, I love both the idea of the importance of awareness, but also so much community. I mean, that's a big part of my own journey as well, wanting to do the monastic thing and very much going down that path, and realizing how important community is. I mean, a big choice for my family and I moving back to the United States from Asia was so that we could really integrate more with community. Where we were living, there was lots of travelers, so people would be there for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, but then they leave again. So there wasn't that long established sense that community can bring. And I think that's hopefully where so much of our world culture is moving into, of recognizing the importance of the community and how much it can help. Because I know that the vast majority of my success, while my ego will like say, well, I worked for this and I did this, I know certainly that most of it is due to the community. It's due to people responding to and interacting with. It's not like some solo power of mine, like, haha, I'm just a hard worker. And that's something that took me a long time, very much like I got to do this on my own. It's got to be my own thing. And being such a perfectionist, I'm like, I want it done my way. So it's a really powerful thing to interact with the community and let the community help. Asking for help, as you said, is another really big challenging thing for people. I know it's a challenging thing for me as well. So that can be very therapeutic and powerful, and a great way just to kind of integrate some of these ideas into our daily life.
And just to, put some science to it also, because I'm, again, that geek side of me, but in so many of the studies, that what they've shown is one of the number one most important correlation for longevity is strong, nourishing relationships. So it's like you can, exercise right, eat your omega-3s, breathe fresh air. All those things are very important too. But the biggest cofactor for people living the longest is that piece of, look at nature, right? Like most things don't isolate in the natural world. And that speaks, again, science is corroborating what we really already know. But I think it's cool. I love hearing that stuff of like, all right, yeah, makes sense.
Well, I love all of the concepts and ideas behind the 6 qualities of consciousness. I particularly appreciate as well the idea of getting more into community, and I think that's something that I hope we do more. So hopefully listeners have gotten a lot out of everything that we've discussed today. How can people find out more about you? Like, is there the best way to get one of your books, or to see the types of work that you're doing right now? How can people contact you?
Yeah, so my books are on Amazon. That's a great place to look for them, and also through my website, which is just DannyArguetty.com.
And do you want to spell that for us? We'll have it in
sure.
show notes too, but just in case.
Yeah, so it's DannyArguetty.com. And the 6 Qualities of Consciousness is a print book, also printed with the environment in mind. That was a big piece for me. So it's made with green energy and recycled paper. And there's also an ebook and also an audio book version. So for those that are on the move, that's my favorite format, because it's a British man that's speaking. It's not my voice. I try to do it, but I thought second best to me is going to be someone with a really fun British accent. And I'm also on social media, although I'm not great at it. So, like website is probably the best place to communicate, say hi. I'm always open to being in the conversation, love to hear from people. And just gratitude to you. Thank you so much for doing this. It's fun to chat about these things.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you coming on the show, and appreciate all the work that you've done. I still reference you often when I'm doing teacher trainings and stuff. We had spoken about that before in terms of your clarity of speech and your wonderful vocabulary and how you articulate things that you're doing. So I'm really happy to have you on the show today. Happy to know you. I'm glad that you can make it today. Hopefully people search you out and get your book. I actually just got your ebook the other day, the ebook version of the 6 Qualities of Consciousness. So I'm excited to dive more into that. But let's stay in the conversation. Maybe we can have you again on the show sometime again in the future, talk about more awesome tantric philosophy ideas. Until then, I hope all goes well with you, and for all the listeners, thank you for listening to the show today. You can check out Danny from his website or on social media like Facebook. We will have, again, all of that info in the show notes for later. Danny, thanks again for coming on the show today. Listeners out there, thank you so much. Namaste. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show today. Please go over to iTunes, write a review, let us know what you think. It helps us in creating new content for all of you. It also helps new listeners get a sense of what to expect from the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.